Hi, I'm author Camille DeMaio, and I just released a book this month, and I've been doing a lot of interviews about the book, which has been a lot of fun, and I'm so grateful for the book community who has come around and supported it. But one thing I became really aware of is that even though the author's name is on the book, there are so many other people who are involved in the book process. And you may already suspect a lot of them, which is your editors and your publicists and so forth. But the big community that I am really in love with is the Bookstagram community, the book readers, the book reviewers, bloggers, because if you don't have a reader, you don't have a book. And so I thought I would like to really start a series where I turn the tables, and I would like to interview a lot of the people who don't get their names on the front of the book, but they have so much to do with a book doing well and bolstering an author through their dark moments, which we all get. And it's back to take a village. It takes a village, and I very firmly believe that. I just get to be lucky to have my book on the front of the cover, but I can't do it alone. So one of my favorite bookstagrammers, Ashley Hasty, has agreed to be my guinea pig for this first interview where I'm flipping the tables. And I decided to start with somebody who is a reader, because that's really how we all start as writers too. That's the thing we have in common about this book world, is that we're all fundamentally readers. So I thought, let me talk to a great reader who has taken it to another level. She's got a book blog called hastybooklist.com, and on Instagram, she's Ashley Hasty, which is where we met. And so I'll turn it over to you, Ashley, if you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Ashley Hasty. As you mentioned, I do the blog Hasty Book List. I started it about, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. I can't remember now. But yeah, I've had a really great time getting to know the book community. And although I'm not really making a profit off of it, I am making some fantastic connections. So I'm really happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
That's great. And how did you get started in that? Because I think a lot of people who will be watching this are people who love to read, but they would like to find a way to connect more and more. And yet it can seem really daunting, especially when there's pages out there that are just doing great. You've got almost 6,000 followers right now on Instagram. You've clearly built that over time. And that can be a little intimidating, I think, if somebody's starting out, but they do want to connect. They want to meet authors. They want to get advanced copies and review them. So where would you suggest that somebody starts if they'd like to move their hobby up a little bit?
Yeah, well, the first thing to do is to just get yourself a website and start writing about the books you're reading. So you can get free books from a library. If your goal is to get free books, then go to the library, get a free book, write about it, and over time, people will start following along. Hopefully your friends are interested in what books you're reading, so you already have a built-in following there. I think I was blogging for a couple of months before the first author reached out to me and asked me to read her book. She may have been self-publishing. I can't remember. It's not often that I get an author reaching out to me directly. It's usually their publicist at this point. But the author reached out to me. She asked if she could send me her book, and I was thrilled. I ran to my husband. I was like, oh my gosh, someone wants to send me their book. I was just over the moon about it. So I read the book, I reviewed it. I was so excited that someone found me that wasn't my mom or my best friend. And then it was probably a couple of months after that, the first publicist reached out to me. I actually reached out to a couple of publicists. I knew someone else who was in the book blogging world, and I asked her to put me in touch with one of her publicists that she really liked to work with, and if she felt comfortable introducing me. And so she gave me the name of one publicist. I started working with that publicist, and then others started finding me. And so I think the first time a publicist reached out to me, I was pretty excited. But to get started is to just start reading and writing about what you're reading. It's that simple.
What goes into your reviews? You and I have talked before, and you said that you had started by just basically summarizing it. But how did your review content evolve over time, and what did you learn in that process?
Well, that's a good question. I did not follow book reviewers or book bloggers or bookstagrammers before I started my own blog. I honestly didn't even know that was a thing. My husband is the one that recommended I even start a blog about books. But Oh my gosh, I just lost my train of thought.
I'm just wondering what goes into a review
Right.
because, you know, there's a lot that really summarize it and they give a couple of lines about what they thought. So where did you go from doing book summary to book opinion and really creating an art out of it?
Right. So my husband recommended I start the blog, and I didn't know what to write about. I really just wanted to read books. And so I was just writing a paragraph, basically summarizing the book, which is really not useful. You can get that on Amazon or bookshop.org or from the author's website. So I started with just a summary, and then over time I started adding to it. And so now I have a formula for my book reviews.
Oh,
I start out with a paragraph about how I found out about the book, and why I wanted to read it and review it. So I get offered, I don't know, maybe 50 books a month to
wow.
review. So I have to like choose, right? I can only read maybe one book a week.
Hmm.
And I really have to narrow them down. So I like to start out my book review with how I found out about this book and why I chose this one. And then I still do include a very brief summary, maybe one paragraph. And then the third paragraph is what I thought of the book and who I think would enjoy reading it. So that's kind of my formula now. Each of my reviews is about 3 paragraphs, sometimes more if I'm writing about the author in particular, if I have a personal connection to that author, if I've read and reviewed other books by that author. Maybe a fourth paragraph will make it in there, but I've kind of developed that formula.
I like that a lot because for anybody listening who would like to try that out, it sounds like if you just overcome the hurdle of getting a blog website, which is free in so many cases, it doesn't have to be fancy or cost a lot of money. It can be free. And you do that, even if you're just starting with a mere summary of it, that sounds like a good way to just feel like I've taken this step. And then I love that you just, where did I find it? That's not a hard question to answer. So maybe if people develop their own little series of questions, a formula, like you said. I will say I have a really hard time writing reviews. It's so weird. I can write whole books, but writing reviews is so crazy, especially when it's something I've just loved so much. I just want to gush, but it doesn't really sound anywhere as good as what I do when I sit down to write a book, but I always do it. I'm a big fan of reviewing books. I like to, I make sure that I review across Amazon, Goodreads, and BookBub for sure when I read a book, but they're so important to authors.
Yes.
So
I
yes.
am, I am a book reviewer. I would not say I'm a very good critic. I pretty much like every book I read for one reason or another. And if I don't like it, I tend to blame it on whatever's happening in my life at the time. Like, I just wasn't into this, but I think it's because I'm distracted with work. I don't know that I've ever read a book that I just like hated. I liked something about it.
That's usually true. And if there's something that I'm just really, really not connecting with, I'm not afraid anymore to just DNF it and put it down. I think the older I get, the more I realize life is too short to be reading a book you're not enjoying. And it doesn't mean it's a bad book, but like you said, it could be just whatever's going on in your life. So rather than give it a poor review, which is not really reflective mostly of the book itself, it's just, I didn't connect with it. So I may just put it down and I'm not going to review it at all. But I don't like to give any review that's damaging to somebody, especially when it's just about my opinion.
Me either.
So you mentioned work there. So what is your day job? Because a lot of people wanting to do this too are squeezing it into other things that they're busy with, but you're not doing this full time. It's not a monetary endeavor. So what's your day job?
So I teach college classes. For 7 years, I taught traditional college classes on campus for Indiana University. Then I moved to Chicago and then later St. Louis. And during that time, I taught online classes for Indiana State, a lot of marketing, branding, fashion history, which is my real passion. And then when I moved back to Chicago, I started teaching for Loyola, which was supposed to be more traditional in seat classes, but with the pandemic turned into another online class. So that's what I do from 9 to 5.
So in historical fashion is your passion there. So I'm assuming that has some influence on the reading that you do.
Of course, of course. So my first love is historical fiction. I think that's of course why we got connected. But I like almost all genres. Maybe not horror.
Yes. don't read horror. I don't read erotica. I think I
Or-
cover most everything else, but I do love historical fiction, and it's an interesting time. It's a good time to be a historical fiction writer right now because contemporary writers now have to grapple with either books they're releasing in 2020 or books they're writing about 2020, not knowing what this year would end up becoming like. And the beauty of historical fiction is being able to look back, and as long as you do your digging and your research well, it's not like anything's going to change in the past. So that's a real gift to be. It's a good time to be a historical fiction writer, basically. So do you have a favorite era within historical fiction that you love to read?
I almost always read a World War II novel. I've read hundreds of them. It's what I studied for my dissertation, so I'm always drawn to them. But I've read so many now that it's really hard to have a fresh perspective on it. So the author has to have something really interesting going on with that World War II novel for me to be interested in it at this time. But I always gravitate towards them, even if I am not seeing the unique take on it. I'm still really tempted to read it.
I have to agree. I'd say World War II is my favorite, but having written one, most of mine touch on it because a lot of them are set in the 40s, but they're not really about the war, except my first one. And I loved writing it, and it is such a fascinating piece of history to dig into. But you're right, as a reader, there are so many World War II books out there that you can kind of only read about rationing and so forth so many times, and that gets a little challenging. So I'm always on the look and eager for an author who is taking that fresh look on it. One that I read recently was The Whispers of War by Julia Kelly, and I thought that that had some things I'd never known about in there. So that
I
was a
love
recent.
Julia Kelly, but I haven't read that one.
Yeah, I really liked it. So I recommend that one a lot. So what would we talked about somebody just getting a start on that. Do you think you might have a book in you someday? A lot of readers aspire to be writers. That's where I got started.
Well, I would say never say never. um, I never thought of myself as a writer. I wrote a dissertation and it was like pulling teeth. I just thought I was like not a writer, but I think fiction could be different.
Mm-hmm.
You
You can go a
know,
lot of other directions. Even when you're writing about a real life person, the fact that you're writing historical fiction gives you some leeway to put into there what you need to put in. Like there's this Japanese art, and I can't remember the name of what it is, but it takes pottery that's broken and it puts it back together, and it melds it together with liquid gold. And
yeah.
they actually consider that beautiful. I did not turn that off. They considered it even more beautiful because its brokenness was brought together by something beautiful. And I kind of think of historical fiction the same way, as we're taking these pieces of history that we learn, and our fiction becomes the gold that cements it all together. And then something I think even more beautiful can get created.
Yes. If
So,
I did ever write a book, it would definitely be about a real person. Can't imagine just fabricating characters out of my imagination. I would need some framework to work with.
yes. My fifth one, the one I just released, is my first about a real life person. And that was an entirely different process. And there's a lot I liked about it. And I liked revealing a real person, and yet I have such a playground with the fiction, the pure fiction stuff, but it was neat. I think I would definitely do it again. I don't have a specific idea in mind, but I would do that. So anybody who is watching this, who loves to read, who would aspire to be a writer, I would say another great thing to do is just get involved in the community. So beyond a blog, Ashley and I are both very active on Instagram, and Facebook is another great place to connect with book groups. So just getting involved as a reader and building community. I would say anybody who later on you would have a book in you, you will suddenly have people who are your cheerleaders, and because they've been authentically your friends. And so now they're very excited to help promote you. But even if it's just you love to read and you don't want to just do it by yourself, there's such an awesome community out there. So back to Instagram, because that's where you and I met, and I think that's where you and I both thrive. What do you love about that community specifically?
Um, I think well, as far as the technology itself, I think it's the most user-friendly. It's very visually oriented as opposed to Twitter, which is more word-oriented. So I like the pictures. I like the different ways you can interact with people. It's posts, but also the stories. I feel like the stories are really where most of the conversations are occurring, at least more recently. I find myself commenting a lot more on Instagram stories than I do on the posts. So I'd like that it's more of a conversation in that way, that you can message people back and forth very easily. It could be a private message or public, which is like that on Twitter too, but I think the private messages on Twitter are a lot less popular than they are on Instagram. So I don't know, it's my biggest community, so I think that it creates more of a conversation too. And almost everyone is on Instagram. Like there's a lot of people not on Facebook. There's a lot of people not on Twitter, but I feel like most of the people I want to interact with are on Instagram.
Yes, I really got on that a few years ago, especially whenever there's a big political cycle. We find that Facebook just gets a really different tone to it. And I turned to Instagram because it was such a happy place, and I could just inundate my feed with book talk and control that a whole lot better than I could on Facebook. And I've seen over the years I've now been on Instagram, more and more people are kind of jumping ship and finding Instagram to be that happy place. I do love the stories. I was a little bit of a latecomer to stories because it kind of made no sense to me that something would disappear in 24 hours. And I thought, well, what's the point of posting it? But my daughters, I have 3 girls and a boy, but at the time all the girls were teenagers. And they told me what a story was, and I just had no use for it. And the first day that I decided I'm going to get on stories and read stories, one of my daughters posted something that she was not real excited about mom seeing, but she had felt pretty safe posting because she knew I never checked stories. And so I did, and I responded, and she said, I've literally never posted anything like that. And the one day that I do, mom decides to do an Instagram story. But yeah, I've been on there.
Your part.
I know. Another really cool way to interact over there is through templates. And you do that really well. You have those on your website, which again is hastybookclub.com, but you also have them as a highlight on your Instagram. And for those who don't know, a template is really just I think it's usually very visually enticing, but it might be something like your favorite reads of 2020 so far. It could be something like that. Or it could be my reading life in GIFs. Do you say GIFs or GIFs?
I think it's GIFs. I think the G stands for graphics, so I feel like it would be a good.
Okay, I'm going to say GIFs because I've heard it both ways. But yeah. I mean, that's so much fun to have, go find the fun little mobile pictures and put them on there, and you can describe your life through pictures. And it's just fun. I think templates are fun and they're super easy. And so you can go to people like Ashley who've created a lot of great ones, and you use their template. You be sure to tag her so she gets the credit for it. And in many cases, they will retag you, so you get a little of attention that way. But those algorithms love to see you be active. And so there's a lot of ways to be active on Instagram besides here's a post or here's an Instagram story. And I think templates are a really fun way to do that. And I think that you do that really well. I'm not so good at that.
I think it's a way of getting to know people too. They're telling you a little bit about themselves when they fill out those templates. And I love it when I see my friends filling them out. So I thought I'd create some just to learn about people.
They are fun. I like the ones that are this or that, coffee or tea, summer or spring, and they're basic. Some people are really creative about putting those together, but even the basic ones I enjoy. I feel like I get a little bit of insight into somebody that I might not have known them in that way before. And anytime you find a commonality with somebody, there's an instant friendship connection there.
Or even if it's different, like if a friend of mine's a tea drinker and I'm definitely a coffee drinker, it's a fun little debate to have over Instagram. No, coffee's the better choice.
There's a lot of good interaction that can happen with that. So Ashley, one of my last question here is that on Instagram, you can create a very short bio and tell people who are landing on your page for the first time a little bit about yourself. So that's where I heard you're a fashion historian, which was so interesting to me. And now I know who to call when I have a historical fashion question, because those do come up. But you described yourself also as a flaneur, and I'd love for you to tell me a little more about that's an important word if you put it right there at the beginning of your bio.
It is. So I first learned about that word when I read a book, and it's like The Extraordinary Objects of France, or I'm butchering that book title. I can't remember exactly what it's called. But I learned about the term. I was taking students over to Paris for a study abroad. And I was reading this book in preparation for that. And they talked about being a flaneur. And it was basically, did you have the official definition in front of you?
Oh, yes, I did look up an official definition. It was stroller, lounger, saunterer, or loafer. And it made me realize I'm married to a flaneur, but that is not a bad thing. So don't, nobody read into that this is a bad thing. It's actually a beautiful way of looking at the world. And so I definitely wanted to hear why that struck you.
Yeah, so I love it's a way of thinking, I think, if I'm remembering correctly, the way Parisians approach the city, and they just enjoy not having a particular destination, just kind of discovering the different nooks in the city and cafes and favorite places to go. But it's just kind of a relaxing stroll through the city. And I thought that was such a great way to learn about a new city, but also a great way to kind of go about life, where you're just like letting life take you where you're supposed to be, as opposed to having like a singular goal in mind and only going in that direction. So
Yeah.
I think it's more of an aspirational description, not necessarily who I am, but very much a rigid planner, and I like things just so. But it's a bit of a reminder that I want to be more like that.
Well, the best surprises, I think the best memories that you look back on, it's true for me, probably true for you in your travels, are the things that were totally unexpected. I
Um,
was traveling in Egypt one time. In fact, I was outside of the hotel in Aswan where Agatha Christie sat and wrote Death on the Nile on this balcony. And so just outside of that, though, there was this wedding party, and they just kind of encompassed me and my mom and just took us in and let us witness this wedding party. And none of that had been on our agenda. Even going to the hotel hadn't been on the agenda. And so that was beautiful. And my husband and I honeymooned in Turkey. And we also stopped by a roadside, and the lady who was guiding us found out it's another wedding thing. There was a wedding going on in town. And when we got invited. So we got invited. We ended up going into this little 3-story tiny room with all the old women wearing coverings, and they just welcomed us into their wedding party, and that wasn't on the agenda. So I have, being an organized planner just like you, I have really come to embrace that. But what I'm very excited about is to learn that there's a word for it. So you've educated.
it's such a great word.
Well, as we sign off, I just wanted to ask, I know that a big moment for you at the beginning was when that first author reached out to you, but have there been any other moments in your book career doing this so far that have really punctuated it or really been especially memorable?
Yeah, I think another like pinch me moment was when I got to interview an author live in front of an audience. So in a bit of a roundabout way, I was introduced to the events director at the St. Louis County Library. And she invited me to interview Fiona Davis in front. I think the audience was like 100 people. It was a pretty good crowd. And I had been in contact with Fiona Davis for about 2 years via Instagram, of course, another great connection made via Instagram. And so I finally got to meet her in person. She was absolutely lovely. She's a great person as well as a great author. She was very nice, eased my nerves. I mean, she does this all the time with her book tours when people go on book tours normally. And it was my first time, but she put me at ease. She had great answers to my questions. It was just really fun. And that was a big moment. I was pretty excited about that one.
Well, she was a great one to start that out with. She's just a very warm, wonderful person. So I love her books. I just love her as a person as well. I get to I go up to New York pretty frequently when we're not in the world that we are in at the moment. And I see Fiona on a lot of those trips. So definitely can attest to that being a really great person to start out an in-person interview with.
I hope
Ashley, is there anything?
in-person interview sometime.
What's that?
I hope we get to do an in-person interview sometime.
I hope so. You know, in all my travels, I've been to most of the states and a lot of countries, but in the United States, up until recently, the only two really major cities I'd never been to were Chicago and Miami. And I just went to Miami in January. So now I just have Chicago left.
Oh, you know who to call.
I know who to call. I'll have to make my way up there. I am not going up that tall tower and standing over the glass. That I'm
That's
not doing that, but I will stand under the bean that's there. I'll do that, but no,
maybe a boat tour.
boat tour sounds great. Not going on a high rise though. So I hate heights so much. I even put it in my author bio that I don't do anything that involves roller skates or heights. So we won't do those things. Ash, is there anything I didn't think of to ask that you would want people to know about book blogging or getting started or connecting with authors or anything like that?
I think the thing I said at the beginning is really key. Just if you want to do it, just get started. Just start doing it. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be great. Just it'll develop over time, and you can't be great at something until you give it a go. So don't be too nervous about it. Just get out there, start writing. The book community is so kind. You'll be embraced in no time.
That has been my favorite thing about becoming a writer. When I get asked that, I thought it would be about the books, but it's actually about the community. It's wonderful. And I'm glad that we have met. It's not in person yet, but this is further than we've gotten with that. So thank you, especially for being my guinea pig. Like I said, I'd like to start a series of interviews that really flips the table, because I just know that a book goes way, way, way beyond the author and even the editor and the publisher. It really is the readers, and I care about that so much. So I'm going to reach out to more over time. And Ashley, let me give this a try. So thank you for that.
Thanks for having me.
All right, and follow her on hastybookclub.com or find her on Instagram at Ashley Hasty. And you can find me there at Camille DeMaio_author. And I'm glad I have a unique name, because I think I'm pretty easy to find there. And then subscribe to this YouTube channel if you would like to catch more interviews, book trailers, book reviews, and we'll find you here too. Thank you.
Thank you.